Bold and raw perspectives of local politics. Important information which impacts our community, nation, and world. Exposing truth, transparency, and getting to the heart of relevant issues that you just won't see in the clickbait media. And always keeping it real. It's the Michelle Tanner Podcast.
But I won't back down.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Michelle Tanner Podcast. We've got a really fun episode today with two people joining me. So before we get into these awesome guests that we have today, let me first give a shout out to the St. George Sunrise Market. Make sure to check them out every Saturday. They are located at Segmiller Park over there in Little Valley area. So all of your farmers markets needs, I am so glad that this helps support our local entrepreneurs and business owners. So definitely 10 to 2 every Saturday. Go support these guys. And then also I noticed today, I wanted to make sure y'all know about this because this looks super interesting to me. This is going to be tomorrow. So Thursday, November 14th, a debate. I love me a good, healthy debate. This is going to be Lyman versus Harding. So there's been some disputes going on about this legislative audit. We talked a little bit about this last week with Speaker Schultz. So there's obviously some differing opinions and perspectives on this legislative audit. Harding, who is the auditor for Salt Lake County, has been calling Lyman a liar. So I love that Lyman was like, dude, let's have a debate. I challenge you to a debate. So it looks like if you want to be there in person, it's in Salt Lake City, or you can join on X. It's going to be 8 p.m. tomorrow. So I'm not going to miss that. I think that looks really entertaining. So on to today's guest. I have sitting here next to me again. I'm so glad she came again. Alexis is just going to be a permanent fixture right here.
Sure am.
Yes. So Alexis,
if the baby will let me.
Yes, we do have a baby here with us today, which I'm also really excited about.
Yes.
Maybe the baby will get some airtime on the baby's first podcast here. I'm honored that it's on the Michelle Tanner podcast.
First podcast.
I love it. So Alexis is part of the Republican Party State Central Committee and just really active here in Utah politics and helping to get good legislation through. So definitely always love having her perspective. And then also part of the Republican Party State Central Committee, we have joining us via Skype, Gunnar Thorderson. Gunnar, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I've got to know, Gunnar, have you joined the dark side and are some creepy swamp establishment rat? Do you have some confessions to make here on the show?
I think you should add some more adjectives to that.
Fortunately, this is where I'm going to break the news right here live on the Michelle Tanner podcast. I am officially it's crazy. Just what's kind of transpired over the last couple of weeks. You mentioned the debate. I'll definitely be watching that. It's crazy how this one issue, with the signatures and this primary election and SB54, should we have even had the primary election? And where does state law and our party bylaws and constitution? It's this huge jumbled mess. And, I have really good friends on both sides of this issue that are arguing, this way and that way. And it's really tearing at the heartstrings trying to navigate these waters. But for me, I've just always tried to have that true north perspective of, we have a way bigger issue going on right now, which is the presidential election that we just won, a historic comeback victory. And, for me, it was let's keep our eye on the prize. Let's help Trump win this. We had important work that we were doing as a party with Turning Point USA out in these battleground states. And so I just, I was let's keep our eye on the prize. Let's try to win this election here. But here in Utah, it's tough because on the one hand, you want to follow state law because it's state law. And then on the other hand, you want to respect the autonomy of our party. And so I've tried to do the best I can to navigate that, and definitely made some friends and enemies on both sides. But no, I don't feel like I just like changed my views all of a sudden or like became this, swamp creature establishment person that, some of these people online are, really going to town, at me. So, but no, I think I still hold true to my conservative values and am definitely fighting for conservative victories. We're just taking this day by day at this point.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the latest controversy that you found yourself in. There was a Deseret News article, and they were talking about Spencer Cox, and you were quoted in that article as being someone who was initially very critical of Governor Cox. In fact, I think if we think about maybe like the top 5 people who have been really vocal against some of the things Governor Cox was doing. People who come to mind, I know you have been critical. I certainly have been critical of some of the things he's done. Eric Moutsos has been a really bold voice and speaking about some of the things Governor Cox has done. The Prestons come to mind as well. And obviously there's been a handful of others as well, but you were someone who was not afraid to speak up against some of the things Governor Cox was doing. And so in this article, it talked about that, but then it also talked about how you met with Governor Cox and you admitted to actually voting for Governor Cox in the general. So talk us through that, because for some people we're thinking, Gunnar, are you crazy casting a vote for Governor Cox? So explain that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, during the really the last 4 years, I would say for 98% of it, I had almost a pure hatred for Spencer Cox. Living through COVID, the DEI, the pronouns, getting on Fox News every day and having to see how embarrassing our governor was. And it seemed like any issue he just stood on the exact opposite side of Trump and attacked him relentlessly. He labeled anyone who is MAGA as an extremist. And, so he made it very easy for us to hate him. And he made it very easy for people who were loyal to Trump and wanted to see him, run again and kind of make that comeback victory that he just did. He made it very difficult to support him. And so I'll tell you, that's exactly how I felt all the way up until I started to see Donald Trump taking on this new broad coalition. And it really shocked me to see him kind of open his arms to, people like Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Elon Musk, Joe Rogan. These were people who trashed Trump for most of his first term. And to see him kind of open the door to these people and say, hey, like, the waters are definitely shifting, and these people started to become a little bit more conservative, and so that sort of set the stage for, wow, like people are really jumping on board who for the last 4 years, or at least during during the entire Biden administration and during his first term, were not really a big fan of Donald Trump. And so it really kind of all came to a head after the assassination attempt. And Spencer Cox, he wrote this letter to Donald Trump. I wasn't super in love with the letter. I mean, it wasn't perfect. He kind of was, it was kind of like a backhanded compliment, if you will. But I was literally shocked that it even happened. I was like, wow, this is crazy. And then he gets on after like saying he wasn't gonna have a vote in the election, or he wasn't gonna go one way or the other. And then after that, he's like, you know what? I'm fully supporting Donald Trump. And at the same time, I'm talking to our party leadership, Rob Axson, Brad Bonham, Kim Coleman, and they were like, look, Spencer Cox just did horrible in this primary election, one of the worst performances ever. And I think he's finally starting to realize that he's completely out of touch with the base of the party. And they were having discussions with him, and pretty much everyone said, look, we have a moment here where we could actually take all of these Utahns who were prior rhinos and prior establishment and get some of them, not all of them, but get some of them to join the Trump train and help us over these next 4 years, make it so that Utah's not an obstructionist state, a force against Trump and his agenda. And my entire time in the SEC, that's been my main argument against Cox is, guys, I want Phil Lyman because Cox is going to fight Trump on everything. And so to start to hear from these people and then see that from Spencer Cox and see sort of that light at the end of the tunnel of like, hey, this he's very likely will win this race. He's going to be our next governor. And some of us have to step up and set the stage for, hey, you don't have to be, a Mitt Romney for the next 4 years. You can actually come join us and try to help bring Utah, together with this agenda and this coalition that Trump is building. And so, I felt like I was playing a minor role in that. And I just, offered a similar letter to Cox. And I said, hey, the delegates are upset with you. You've pissed us all off. You've called us all extremists. And we have plenty to be mad at you about. But let's talk through this. I mean, if you're serious about supporting Donald Trump, let's talk through that. Let's figure out what that looks like. And let's maybe try to get you to apologize to our party and to our delegates and try to mend some of these, issues that we're having. And so I wrote that letter, and I was shocked that his campaign responded and said, yeah, Spencer Cox wants to meet with you and a few other grassroots leaders and party activists. And then the meeting ended up happening. And I mean, it wasn't a pretty meeting. And this wasn't like a bunch of establishment rhinos getting together and patting each other on the back. I mean, it was pretty hostile. And Aaron Bowman was there, and he was going off on Deidre for her abortion, votes, and Chad Saunders laid him out, and Max Sims was there, and there was a whole host of people who were just bringing up everything this guy has done wrong and really holding him to account. And the entire time I said, guys, I completely agree. Like, I understand exactly where you're coming from. And I promise you, I'm going to do whatever it takes to try to start mending this stuff and hopefully, repair some of the damage that I've done. And so, many people walked away going, we don't know. Like, is he going to do this or not? But after that meeting, he went and had several other meetings. He went and met with Trump. And then I was even more shocked to see Trump at a campaign rally say, oh, Spencer Cox, we have a great governor out of Utah, Spencer Cox, who's coming around and, joining the Trump train. And so, it's wild. I never thought in a million years this would happen. I mean, I never thought we would have a situation where Spencer Cox, of all people, would try to join this Trump coalition. And I think, to a lot of people's point, time will tell. Trust but verify. Like, we need to make sure we actually hold him to account. I'm not telling everybody just roll over and let this guy do whatever he wants to do. I think we got to keep the pressure on, and we got to say, hey, these are the commitments you've made. And, if we all want to unify as a party and be the most productive we can, then here's what those steps look like, and here's how we start to lay that out for him. And so, I'm hoping to, be one of those voices that, is able to kind of push him to the right and make him more accountable to the Trump agenda moving forward.
Well, and I'm going to have Alexis chime in here in just a minute too, but I think you nailed it when you said that Spencer Cox realized after the horrific primary he had, although obviously he made it in, and we all knew at that point he was going to be our next governor, like it or not. And so I think him realizing that, though, and how out of touch he is with the party, and I believe he had some true polling going on that showed that he could be in trouble if he did not get some of us grassroots conservatives on his side. And so I think he went on this apology tour as a political motivation. I don't think, personally, I don't feel it was sincere. I wasn't invited to any of these meetings. I would happily sit down with Spencer Cox and tell him exactly my concerns, because I, like you, think it's important that we all have a seat at the table, that we are doing what we can to work together, even when we have differences, and do it in a civil way. I'm totally fine with doing that. And I also don't believe that calling out the truth is somehow uncivil or not disagreeing better. I think it's important that we state the truth exactly how it is. So that's kind of my 2 cents, and we'll talk more about it. But Alexis, what are your thoughts on all this?
He did make a stop down here in southern Utah as well. And so I was invited with some other people to go and meet with him. And I had a lot of the same concerns that Gunnar did. And so I was able to bring those up. And my greatest concern was the division that some of his words and some of his actions were causing in the party. Like Gunnar said, labeling the party as a whole bunch of right-wing extremists wasn't exactly the way to win friends, right? So I mentioned, I was really bothered by the email that went out, particularly after, it kind of just added insult to the injury that had already happened during convention. And so I said, I was really disappointed in the email. I thought the language was really divisive. It's not good for the party, especially when we're trying to rally people to vote for our Republican nominees. It really doesn't help us out much. And Governor Cox issued what I felt, and I can't speak for everyone in the room, but what I felt was a very sincere apology. And he talked about how elections can sometimes bring out the worst in people, and that doesn't, exclude him. And after his apology, I said, okay, well, that's great. Everyone in the room heard that, and I'm sure we all appreciated that. But what about the rest of the delegates who received this email? And that's when we learned it was sent out by a campaign staffer.
But I don't know that I buy that story, actually.
Okay.
At least I don't know that I buy that he didn't sign off on it, because he literally, in his speech, essentially called us all extremists. And it was the most degrading, condescending speech I have ever heard in my entire life come from an elected representative. And then for him to dismiss, well, it was a staffer and we fired them or we've punished them. Like, I still want to see him take more accountability personally.
So
I agree, Michelle. And I just to chime in here real quick.
Mila agrees too.
I think he was very specific in calling the delegates extremists. And then in his speech, he's like, I don't need this system you guys are here doing. Like, the primary voters are going to vote me in. We don't need this caucus system. This thing is, it's antiquated. It's out of date. And so my big point that I made in this behind closed doors meeting was, look, I think it's great you're trying to make amends with Trump, but this caucus system we have here, that's not going anywhere. And I want to see commitments that you're not going to try to destroy this caucus system.
Right.
I said it means a lot to us. It's the most local form of representative government party that we have. It's getting down to the neighborhood level, and I have great precinct meetings, with my neighbors, and we had a flag ceremony, for Memorial Day, and it was beautiful. Right. And so I brought that up, and I said, you take that away, you're going to piss off even more people, including all of these party activists, and we're not going to be your friend. And so I think for me, that was my big takeaway was, look, you can try to make amends with Trump, but you've got to protect or at least stop attacking our caucus system, because like Alexis pointed out, we're trying to go out there and support our convention winners, and then he's out there supporting, these, teacher union backed candidates that are signature gatherers that are trying to undermine our entire system. So I definitely I haven't forgiven him for all that, and we definitely need to hold him to account. And the entire time this has happened, I've been giving a platform and even a louder voice to all the stuff that Phil Lyman has been bringing up about our elections. What Deidre has done by centralizing power and forcing all of the signatures and all the ballots to go through one county instead of having it be distributed. I've been calling that out, and we need to make changes this next session to strengthen our elections and to defend election integrity. And I plan on holding them to account on that.
I like that idea of the accountability. That was something that I asked for in that meeting as well. I just said, hey, if this was a campaign staffer's mistake, couldn't you send out then an email to correct this for all of the delegates so that people know that shouldn't have been sent out as like an additional slap in the face? And I think it took maybe like a week or something, but they did send out an email. I think the title of it was like Mending Fences or something. And in the email, they mention how the email shouldn't have been sent out. And so I appreciated that. I feel like that was a step in the right direction, a step towards mending those fences. And so hopefully, like Gunnar said, hopefully we can continue to see behaviors that show rather than just tell, right?
Yeah, and I can appreciate steps in the right direction. I think it's sad when it has to come, though, when it's politically motivated, when you're put up, essentially he's being put up against the wall of realizing he's now in the minority of Republicans. And when you go out one day on CNN or MSNBC and talk about how you are going to write in a candidate because you will not cast a vote for Donald Trump, and then the next week you flip, oh, well, there's been an attempted assassination and Utahns clearly aren't with me on this writing campaign. So, well, gosh darn it, I'm going to support Donald Trump. So I'm not saying I don't appreciate him coming around, because truly I do. It's the right thing that he came around. But do I think his motivations were pure in that? No. Am I open to changing my perspective? Sure, I'm open to that. But that's the way I see it right now, is that it's politically motivated. I look back personally to COVID, because that's when I became politically vocal. And I've seen Spencer Cox also skirt responsibility on the fact that he allowed children to be masked for an entire school year. That both him and Deidre went out on a little campaign talking about how they encourage employers to force an experimental medical treatment onto their employees in order for Utahns to provide for their families. I take that personally. I have yet to see an apology.
I will say Mayor Hoster, Bill Hoster, in our meeting with Governor
Shout
Cox.
out to Mayor Hoster.
Yes, this is a big shout out. He pressed on that issue specifically, on COVID specifically, and really just kind of wanted to get an idea from the governor if you know, hindsight is 20/20. Would you do things differently? And I very much felt his response was, I would do things differently. I you know, during the process started figuring out that these people with all of the alphabet behind their names, that was what he said. I loved that. These people with the alphabet by their names really had other motivations. And so then they started bringing in other people to respond to this and to give their opinions on it as well. So it was good to hear from him that he doesn't think he handled COVID perfectly and that he would do it differently next time around. Yeah. And I think it seems like maybe he said he wouldn't have masked our kids and things like that.
Well, and I wish he would say that publicly so the rest of us can hear that, because actually I truly think Utahns are very forgiving as a people. And actually, people in general have a very short memory when it comes to politics, which is the only reason Spencer Cox is still in office. Because if this election would have taken place in like 2022, no way he would still be in office, because all of those things were still so fresh on Utahns' minds. But for those of us, especially who were directly impacted, who lost jobs, lost careers because of these mandates, we didn't forget. And so until some of us hear that sincere apology, I think it's going to be very difficult for, you know, us to actually think that he's being sincere on some of these things. And it's scary seeing, we saw people's true colors during COVID, because none of us knew all the answers at that time, but we saw who understood the proper role of government, and that we should never violate essential liberty under the guise of public safety. And we saw which representatives understood that and which didn't, and who didn't. And he was, unfortunately, one who clearly did not understand that. So I hope y'all are right. I hope he's sincere. I hope, for, you know, the sake of all of us in Utah, that things are better moving forward. And I can appreciate, though, that you guys, and, you know, myself included, would be willing to sit down with him, because truly, we need to find ways to move forward in positive directions. And it doesn't do us any good to just be shouting obscenities at the sideline. We need to all be coming to the table and be willing to work together regardless of differences. So I appreciate that both of you seem to be good examples of this.
I hope he'll keep doing the grassroots meetings, and I hope you'll get the opportunity to meet with him, because that was something that I wanted to see happen, especially when he was down here. I tried to get you invited.
Well, that's the thing is I was supposedly on the list and his campaign said, oh, we know who she is. And I wasn't invited. So I think that's really interesting.
Well, and to your point, Michelle, that was one question I did ask him. I said, is this like just for political games, or are you sincere about wanting to actually work with Trump and support him and vote for him? And he told me he was sincere, and that the assassination attempt really opened his eyes to how much this division has gotten to a boiling point in our country that needs to be mended. And he said, look, I'm on this Disagree Better campaign, to try to mend fences with the left. And it's sort of this bipartisan, let's get the left and right to talk better with one another. And he said, I've kind of forgotten to do that with my own party. And so that's why I'm meeting with you guys. And so I don't think that just overnight, all of a sudden, Spencer Cox just immediately changed. And for me, it's the same thing. Like, I have spent the last 8 years criticizing this man. And so I didn't change overnight either. And just all of a sudden, I'm now this huge Spencer Cox fan. But to talk about the political motivations of this moment, just as Spencer Cox saw, okay, wow, like my brand of republicanism is dying. This is kind of the way that people are moving. And if I want to have influence in that, this is, I need to be involved. I need to have these discussions. I need to work with this coalition. I saw kind of the similar writing on the wall with, wow, this guy's actually going to be our governor. This guy's actually going to win. And these next 4 years can either be absolute torture and hell, or we could try to pull this guy to the right. And the problem that I saw with this write-in campaign was, wow, if he has this coalition, or if he has this threat of this write-in, that, if they poll 15, 20%, a Democrat could win. Well, then he's going to try to go get more moderates. He's going to try to go left to get some of those people, because the right is completely against him. And so I saw that as like, oh my gosh, if we as a party institutionally support this write-in campaign, we could end up with a Democrat, and we could also push Spencer Cox, who very likely will be our next governor, even further to the left. And that was a really big problem for me. And so I just said, look, I've got to do whatever I got to do to try to pull this guy to the right, because he's most likely going to be our governor. And I'd like our next 4 years to not be hell, because I just lived through COVID. I just lived through the Biden administration. And if Trump wins, I don't want to be in the only state that doesn't get to reap the full benefits of this agenda, because our governor decides to be an obstructionist force to everything that Trump stands for. So I am positive, I'm optimistic about where we're headed, but exactly to your point, Michelle, I think we need to hold him accountable, and he needs to apologize to the delegates. We need to get him in front of the body of the party, and he really does need to tell everybody, not just the party insiders that are in these closed-door meetings, that he's sorry and that he's seeing the winds change here. But I'd really like to see him do that to our entire party delegation, and well as commit to helping to strengthen our caucus system rather than destroy it.
Yeah, that was the reality, really for me, was after the primary, where we lost almost all of our races. We got Joanne Brinton down here in the school board, so we were celebrating that.
Was a huge win.
That was awesome. But essentially all of our other races of candidates that were our candidates that we elected as delegates, those were obliterated. And that was the reality for me after, is whether we like it or not, Spencer Cox is going to be our next governor. And so I even got some criticism for not being as vocal after the primary, because prior to the primary, I was a staunch, loud Phil Lyman supporter. I held campaign events. I helped raise thousands of dollars for his campaign. So no one can accuse me of not being a, Phil Lyman supporter. I had some frustrations with some of the things from people on their campaign and some of their approach, which I think was really detrimental for the Lyman campaign, unfortunately. But after that primary, it's like, you've got to face the reality of, this is who we have to work with, and let's do our best to make sure this person who we are stuck with for the next 4 years will come to our side on some of these issues when he notoriously has not. And so I can appreciate the points you're bringing up of, we don't want to just push this person further and further over to the moderates and the left. We
Right.
want him to be able to support our legislation moving forward.
Yeah, I think Adam Snow, our county commissioner, said if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I'd prefer not being on the menu. I'd prefer a seat at the table. I prefer an open ear, someone who will listen. And I do think that that's something that Gunnar's been experiencing the last few months, and that was certainly my experience when Governor Cox was here too. I mean, honestly, he didn't have to send out the email correcting it. I'm sure his campaign probably didn't love the idea, because no one wants negative attention right before an election. No one wants to bring back up something that happened months ago that would paint him in a negative light. So I appreciated that they did it anyway.
I think they were legitimately worried, though, which
could be.
really surprised me that they were, because in my mind, it's like after the primary, he has it in the bag. You know, people vote because they have an R next to their name, period, in the state of Utah. Not all, but a lot. And so if you're that Republican nominee moving forward, it's almost a guarantee that you are going to be elected. And so it was interesting to me in talking to some of these, you know, campaign insiders that there was some legitimate concern about this split vote between a write-in with Phil Lyman, with Governor Cox, and would Brian King actually have a chance, which, you know, I didn't want the Democrat winning. I did not take the position of the Democrat would be better than Spencer Cox, although, you know, Spencer Cox has done a lot of things that are more aligned with the Democrat Party. There would still be some loyalty in some respect, there should be anyway, to the Republican side and to our Republican-dominated legislator. So I think it would have been more detrimental had Brian King won. But I thought it was interesting that it seemed like the Cox campaign thought that that could be a legitimate threat from the way they were acting anyway.
I think there were others in Utah who would have said that too, that Brian King really had, the Democrats were so organized this year. We saw how quickly they even came out against our constitutional amendment, right? So I think as a party, we are going to have to look at that going forward. We are so reliant in Utah on getting Republicans elected. And I wonder how much that actually damages our party sometimes, because sometimes they go after each other and they eat their own. And so I think that's something that we're going to have to take a look at moving forward is how do we create unity around our candidates, around the party itself.
Well, and a lot of that comes back to SB54. So when either one of you met with Spencer Cox, was there a commitment to actually protect our caucus convention system?
No, I didn't hear one. It's definitely something that you know we still got to work on. To be honest with you, it doesn't help when you have delegates out there whose sole mission is to just tear down anybody who's trying to push the needle forward in any way. You know, as I've worked more with people on the Hill and saw kind of how this legislation process works, it is a lot of debate and discourse, and people even on the same side have heated disagreements. And so after, you know, months and months of working these issues out, you're never going to have a product that is perfect or that makes everybody happy. And so what tends to happen is there's one issue that just really ticks somebody off, and then they go on this campaign tour of calling people evil and rhino swamp creatures and this and that just because of one vote or you know, one thing, one issue to them. And I think that's super destructive. And so these people kind of view those sort of fringe delegates whose sole mission is to go and attack people and drag them through the mud, you know, for ancillary issues. And I think that's unproductive. And to Alexis's point, we really failed to rally with this constitutional amendment to protect against ballot initiatives that are coming. You see them all over in these other states putting full-term abortion in states like Montana,
Arizona.
expanding abortion access in states like Arizona. These ballot initiatives are the new tool of the left, and they're years ahead of us in planning these attacks out. And we're just now catching up to the fact that now we have a Supreme Court that says, hey, if a ballot initiative passed here in Utah, you're not going to touch it. That's going to be the law of the land, and that's how it's going to stay. And so we failed to rally as a party because we were divided over this write-in campaign and these signatures in SB54. So it's the work of people like me and Alexis and you, Michelle. Right now, we've got to find a way to unify our party, because if we can't rally to protect ourselves against these ballot initiatives on an issue as critical as that, we're going to lose our state. And at the end of the day, people are going to ask, well, how did this happen? It's happening because we can't get over our differences in our division. And so we've got to start having more discourse. We've got to have these more meetings, and I think through that discourse and discussions, we're going to find out that we actually have a lot more in common than we think, and we won't see each other as evil and as having these ulterior motives. I think at the end of the day, we have one common goal in mind, which is, hey, here's the agenda against the Democrats that just passed by a huge margin here in our country. Let's work to get those measures passed, and let's protect ourselves from these radical left ballot initiatives. And if we can't rally behind stuff like that, I mean, there may be no hope for us here in Utah. So I hope that we can rally and that we can unify on these issues. And after Cox won this election, he could have just said, you know what, I'm not even going to talk about unifying with these crazy delegates. But instead, the Deseret News reaches out to me and says, hey, we just had an interview with Spencer Cox, and all he could talk about was wanting to heal the division in his own party. Tell us about that experience. Tell us about, how these meetings have gone, because this is a real value for him. And so for him to try to be leading from the front in figuring out how we do this, I think we at least owe it to ourselves as a party to say, okay, what does that look like? What are those critical issues that we need to see movement on, so that at the end of the day, we can stop villainizing each other and stop calling each other evil and trashing each other 24/7 online, so that we can actually start to have those constructive meetings where we can start to figure out what that agenda looks like. What is an agenda with Donald Trump and Spencer Cox and both wings of our party getting together and working collaboratively on some type of agenda? What does that look like? It's yet to be fully thought out and constructed. That's the work of the next few months and this next term. And that's the work I plan to start immediately.
Yeah, that's great. Alexis and I were just talking about this the other day, how, if you lose these so-called friends like this who flip on you in a dime, if they see just one thing that they disagree with on you, and all of a sudden you become this, evil, terrible person in their eyes because of one difference of opinion, they obviously weren't really a friend in the first place. Alexis and I, we have disagreed passionately on candidates, on issues. And yet at the end of the day, we're still friends. We still love each other. We can still have a civil dialogue. And I think, Gunnar, like you're saying, I think that's what's missing with some of this division, is being able to realize, like, it's okay to only agree with each other 85% of the time. Like, we don't have to use that 15% to go after and attack and say how evil each other are and that vitriol. Like, when does that hate ever get us anywhere, really?
Right. The friendly fire only hurts Republicans, right? And I've been saying this a lot, and maybe it's because I'm from the South, but I just think that Utah maybe could just use some good old-fashioned manners, right? I'm like, can we just use manners? Can we not name call? Can we, if we have a chance to take a shot at someone, can we take the higher road? I don't know. Is that possible? I would love to see that happen, especially in Utah, in a place where we have a Republican majority. Can we just use a little more politeness when we're talking to each other?
Well, and I think in this way, this quote disagree better campaign backfired a little bit, because the way Spencer Cox's approach with, while noble, of course, disagree better, but his approach seemed so contradictory when he was not always doing that. And so I think it has pushed some people further away from that overall goal. So I want to be clear that I'm not talking about the Spencer Cox, we just have to disagree better and roll over and I'll be, nice and kind. And if you disagree, then you're just not kind. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being a truth seeker, which I think all of us here are, not tribalizing, and really just looking for ways to come together for humanity. So we're down to literally 10 seconds. Thank you all for coming on. Any last thoughts?
No, you hit it right on the head.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for having me, Michelle. And Alexis, great to be here with you as well.
Hey, let's do it again. Great conversation, guys. Take care.
Thanks for being a part of the Michelle Tanner Podcast. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share. And always remember to keep exposing truth.
But I won't back down. No, I won't back down.
This has been a production from a podcast studio.